Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the iron-carbon phase diagram. Anybody interested in steel metallurgy? This is the place to start. This really tells you almost everything you need to know about what's going on in the steel at different temperatures. It doesn't really get into some parts like tempering, but especially in the forging stage and the hardening, this diagram is kind of where it's at. Well, first, walk through what's here. Some of this might be a little bit off screen, but if you do a quick Google search, you can pull up an iron-carbon phase diagram really easily, kind of follow along on that. It's definitely something worth having easy access to. We kind of lucked into this poster. I don't remember where it came from, but I love having it up here. So, first thing, along this side, we've got the temperature scale. This one's really nice because it's got both Fahrenheit and centigrade. That just gives us a quick comparison. So, if we're reading somewhere, a paper or other description that's in centigrade or Celsius, which, my brain doesn't automatically make the conversion. I really think in Fahrenheit. So it's nice to be able to just quickly look on here, find that. And across the bottom, we've got the carbon content. And it's listed in weight percent, which is how you normally see it. If you see, 1095 is 0.95% by weight. And it also, this one has the carbon content in atomic percentage, which is a very different number. Iron is a much heavier atom than carbon, so the weight percentage and the atomic percentage, totally different. And that's part of why you can, for example, have a 1% by weight carbon steel that then ends up developing an enormous amount of iron carbide. It's actually because by atomic count, there's a lot more carbon there. So there are a few zones on this that are really worth noting. One, for example, is this point right there, and this is the point where you really start getting into cast iron. That's about 2%, just over. It's about 2.2%. At that point, you're really getting into cast iron. And that's why you'll note that the melting temperature really levels off at that point. So that's what this line is essentially indicating, is that you're going from fully solid to either pure liquid here, so 4.3%. That is that's the just plain old. It's all liquid all the time. Well, not all the time, but once you hit this temperature, and that is the lowest melting point of the iron-carbon combination. So that's often referred to as the eutectic point. And so actually, while I'm on that, eutectoid, different things. The eutectic point in an alloy combination is the lowest melting temperature combination of those two. The eutectoid point in steel refers to this little junction right here, which is 0.77% carbon by weight. This is why steels like 1075, 1080, 1084, really easy to heat treat because they're all right around this point. They're referred to sometimes as eutectoid steels. So eutectoid steels have this great thing where at low temperatures, below critical, they're essentially all pearlite. And that pearlite goes very quickly into solution once you pass critical to get full austenite. To either side of the Eutectoid Point, things are a little bit more complicated, and we'll get into that in a minute. So up here, between 2.2% and the 4.3% carbon, if you get hotter than, around 2100 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to get into this mushy state in the steel where you've got some liquid, some solid. If you hit it, it's like a bag of wet sand. This isn't an area you really want to get into. For forging purposes, it really might as well be liquid. So, it won't actually fall apart in the forge, but it'll fall apart under the hammer. So for most steels, the area that we really are playing around with is actually, the 1% line and lower. And really the area that we're looking at a lot is, really right in here. That's where most of the action takes place. So let's say you've got a steel like 1050. We could come down here, kind of, in this case, guesstimate a little bit where 1050 would be. So you'll note that there's a separation. We have sort of, rather than for the eutectoid steels, we have a very specific, okay, you hit critical, bam, you've got austenite. It isn't quite that simple, but it's pretty close to that simple. Whereas this zone here, we get a mixture of ferrite and austenite. So here, this triangle, kind of triangular area up here, you get all austenite, which if you want to end up with martensite, hardened steel, you need to start with austenite. So this is why that becomes really pretty key. In this section where you've got ferrite and austenite, if you quench from this region, you're not going to get full hardness because you have not converted all of your steel to austenite. You will get some hardening, but you will not get full hardening. Which is why, so like 1050, you have to get to a higher temperature. Critical for eutectoid steels is actually below 1400. In practice, typically one wants to go to like 1450, 1475 for most of those steels, just because conversion isn't really instantaneous. So you go a little bit above, add that extra energy to the system, push you over the edge. And also at that sort of temperature range, you're not getting rapid grain growth, so it works out great. But for something like 1050, or for that matter, 4140 or 5160, these hypo-eutectoid steels, so less than eutectoid steels, you really have to go hotter to get full austenite in order to be able to then quench and get full martensite. At a certain point, as you lose carbon, you're just never going to get full hardness. So full hardness generally considered to be better than 62 Rockwell before tempering. And that's, that can become an issue. This is why some steels, 4140, really durable steel, might be great for a sword, something where you don't need to hold the most amazing edge, but you wouldn't want to make an everyday using knife out of 4140 probably. This is where steel choice really comes in. And then also doing the proper heat treat for that. So, kind of on the other side of that, on the other side of the eutectoid, you get into the hyper-eutectoid steels. So anything, 1095, W1, W2, 5200, all of these are hyper-eutectoid steels. So now you end up with some decisions to make, because this area over here, in this case, we're just going to worry about this lower one, austenite and cementite. So cementite is iron carbide. If you have other carbide forming elements in there, so like chromium, vanadium, molybdenum, those kind of get lumped in with cementite for the most part. They behave a little differently, but we're not gonna worry about that too much in this little overview. So if you've got austenite and cementite, this means you don't have full austenite. However, you could very easily have enough carbon in solution to get full hardening. So you could hit that, 62, 64, even 65 Rockwell without putting all the carbon in solution, leaving yourself some carbides. Now, what form those carbides in is going to change what they do with performance. So generally speaking, if you've developed really large carbides, so they're like clumps or lumps throughout the steel, those are going to really give you kind of a saw-edged effect. Certain steels really, they heat treat for that. That's exactly what they're going for. But if you want a really fine razor edge, you don't want large carbides. So in those hyper-eutectoid steels, you really need to pay more attention to get the type of structure and edge that you want. I'm not going to put myself out there as an expert on that aspect. That might be where checking out some of Kevin Cashin's work really going to help you out. That information is out there. It's never been my specific focus. But if you do want to get full austenite, so you don't have carbides, those higher carbon steels, those hyper-eutectoid steels, again, you need to go to a higher temperature in order to put all carbon in solution, to dissolve all the cementite, all the carbides. Just another couple of quick notes on this diagram. If you add carbide formers, like I was saying before, like chromium, vanadium, molybdenum, those are a more durable carbide than cementite, than iron carbide. And by durable, I mean they are stable to a higher temperature. So what will happen is that this pure austenite zone actually shrinks as you introduce those additional carbide forming elements. This is why the stainless steels, the cutlery grade stainless steels, which have a lot of chromium, typically more than 12%, you have a really small window to get full austenite. So you're looking at a really tight area that you've got to hit in order to get full austenite. And this is part of why there was a lot of trouble early on getting high performance cutlery grade stainless steels. It wasn't that the steel was bad, it's that it's just trickier to heat treat. It's also why it's very difficult to do a proper heat treat on stainless steel out of your forge. Just as soon as you have all that chromium carbide that is very stable at temperature, this pure austenite section shrinks in so much. It's really hard to get full austenite. And the crazy part is that it shrinks in from all directions because the liquid iron side also comes in somewhat. So you run into a situation where you're trying to hit full solution on your carbide and you go a little too far, you bump over into partial liquid. That's not where you want to be quenching from. Sort of the flip side of that is nickel. Nickel actually expands the austenite zone. So as you add nickel, it actually becomes easier to achieve full austenite. So small amounts of nickel sorry, small amounts of nickel can improve the hardenability of steels. So like L6, which is a pretty simple tool steel, has some nickel, and also tends to be air hardening. You got to watch out for that stuff. But nickel's also added for toughness, various other reasons. Again, I'm not going to say I'm an expert in exactly what every element, alloying element is going to do for you, but I do know that nickel expands the austenite zone, so expands this triangle, and if you add enough nickel, you've got all austenite all the time. That's where you get into the austenitic stainless steels. So that's the austenitic stainless steels are 18% chromium, 8% nickel, typically. That's the most. The 18-8 is kind of the standard formulation. They play around with it though. So by that time, when you hit 8% nickel, it's almost impossible to get anything other than austenite. So nickel's a very powerful alloying element in that regard. It's really easy to tip over the edge into a steel that's almost useless for blade making. So the, I think that pretty much covers the basic transition points here. And, I'll probably be referring back to this chart sometimes when giving some talks about making woots. Woots really plays around with this, in woots typically are about 1.5% carbon. And so once you hit 1.5% carbon, it's actually really difficult to put all the carbon in solution. One does have to start being extra careful at the top end of the forging range. It's really easy with very high carbon steel to bump over into that mushy state. But that's not actually why woots traditionally was very hard to forge. It was traditionally very hard to forge because of other impurities such as phosphorus. Phosphorus does some funny stuff to grain boundaries. You get some other compounds in there, and basically you get a very low temperature liquid compound that, again, creates kind of that bag of wet sand effect. So in the crucible steel that I make, I don't really have much in the way of phosphorus typically, so this is the line I need to worry about. Many of the antique woots formulations, just because of the materials that they were using, did have some phosphorus, so they were more limited at the top end. But this bottom end line here, that transition from the austenite and cementite to the pure austenite, that line is kind of what one plays with in woots to develop the carbide structures. So just again, very quick overview. Right here we have the Eutectoid point of steel, which is where you have at lower temperatures basically entirely pearlite. Pearlite is a specific mixture of pure iron and iron carbide, cementite. And those steels are the simplest to work with, the simplest to heat treat, and good heat treat is really the key to a good blade. You can have a really high-end steel that if you can't heat treat it properly, you're not going to get the performance out of it. It can actually be much worse. So again, eutectoid, hypo-eutectoid, less than eutectoid carbon content, and hyper-eutectoid, more than eutectoid carbon content. So that's it for today. Again, like I said, I'm going to be coming back to this. I really encourage folks to download a copy of an iron carbon phase diagram. It's a really great tool just for gaining that deeper understanding of what's going on. Thanks for watching.